Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar entitled Coronavirus, How to Work from Home the Right Way. In this webinar, we'd like to cover some practical pointers around what to consider and plan for when you're working from home. Many of us are used to working exclusively from the office, but with a growing expectation that we may be requested to work from home for an undetermined amount of time, we at IT Force thought it might be useful to run this session. This webinar is actually pretty unique because generally our webinars are attended by managers and power users from our client base, but this one is predominantly being attended by end users, which is great. So we're going to try and keep it as non-technical and practical as possible. But before we start, let's introduce the companies and people who will be addressing you today. I'm Roisin Cahill, Operations Director at IT Force. Most of you will be well aware of IT Force. As a reminder, we're an award-winning managed services company based here in Dublin. We pride ourselves in the quality of our service and would invite you to seek further information about us, the services we provide, and our awards on our website, www.itforce.ie. Michael Coyle, who you see there on the right of the screen, is a technical enablement specialist, and he works at Micro Warehouse. Micro Warehouse are the largest Irish-owned IT distributor in the country, and they provide software, hardware, printers, and accessories. And finally, Mark Skelton on the left will be addressing you today. Mark is our Chief Technical Officer here at IT Force. Some of the areas we plan on covering might be things that you already know or have thought of, but hopefully we will go through some areas that you haven't yet considered. So I'm going to go first, and I'm going to cover what you need to work from home. So practical things like your workspace and connectivity, etc. Then I'm going to hand you over to Michael, and Michael's going to address the area of communication. Finally, Mark will talk through some practical security tips that you might find useful when working remotely. Regarding housekeeping issues, the webinar should last approximately 30 minutes and we'll allow another 10 minutes at the end for questions and answers. So if you have any questions, please drop them into the questions pane on the right-hand side of your screen and we'll get to as many of the questions as we can at the end. Also, a copy of the webinar will be distributed to all attendees, and please feel free to share this with your colleagues in your company if you find it useful. So let's get started. From an organizational point of view, sometimes the concept of working from home can sort of be frowned upon and thought of negatively, both by managers and by staff. So for different reasons, but managers might not be convinced about productivity. They may feel that less is being done, and staff members themselves can find it working from home quite lonely at times. But working from home can be very productive, not only because potentially long commutes are eliminated, but there's other things that you can do to try and make your time at home more productive. So a couple of points about that. So firstly, nobody's going to be looking over your shoulder to see if you're keeping on top of your tasks. So you need to keep yourself on track and be organized. So from that perspective, it's helpful to structure your day like you would if you were in the office. So even if you don't generally use calendar, for instance, it might be helpful to use it to help you establish a routine just to ensure that you get key tasks done. It tends to be more practical to try and measure goal completion rather than task completion at home. And this is, again, is one of the reasons why managers don't especially like people working from home, because they can't micromanage people, so they can't measure tasks very well. So it's easier if they can measure goals. So it's a good idea for you to set up some goals for yourself, and that way you can look back every now and again and see what you've managed to complete. It's also helpful to schedule in meetings and time with co-workers, and helpful to share an agenda in advance, so the people that you're going to need to interact with are available and they're ready to deal with you when you're looking for them at a particular time in the day. So we would recommend setting up your meetings and putting them into the calendar so everybody knows what's expected of them and when they need to be available to help you out or to deal with you. And the final point on organising yourself is that it's better to work regular hours. So start when you usually start in the morning, finish when you usually finish, because otherwise people can tend to let the day get away from them and daydreaming, or alternatively you can end up working longer hours. You can actually end up working overtime within your normal day. So a few points just on location and schedule. So from a location perspective, having a separate work area is the best plan. So if you have a home office, it's best to use that. But if you don't, the best thing to do is to try and set yourself up in a particular space. That will always be better than sitting at a couch or sitting on your bed or at the kitchen table. So it's recommended for a couple of reasons. So firstly, it can be a quieter place away from other people at home. and away from children if they're at home. And at the moment, with the coronavirus, it's likely that your children are going to be at home as well. So a quieter place away from everybody else. But it's also a place that you can leave to have your breaks and your lunch. So, and you can leave the place at the end of the day if you have it set aside somewhere in your house. So that allows you to separate work from home somewhat. And that effectively creates a delineation between work and home, which is positive. So just to talk about some of the tools of the remote trade. What do you need? This part is all about what do you need if you're going to work from home? Practical things. So the first thing I would say is you need a good quality chair. If you're going to be spending extended time at a desk, you might be able to just collect and bring your chair home from work. That's one idea. If not, and if you can't purchase one, if you're going to be using a kitchen table and chair, you'll probably find that your back is going to get sore. So you might need to move around a little bit more than you would ordinarily. So it's not ideal to be using your kitchen table, and better if you have a good quality chair. It's a good idea to bring backup hardware with you. So by that I mean things like spare chargers, batteries, etc., things that you just might need for your mouse or for other pieces of equipment. At this coronavirus time, we don't know how long we may be asked to work remotely, so you might consider bringing some files with you that you may need to use, and don't forget things like your two-factor authentication fobs and the bank login and things that you don't use every day but that you may need over the next coming weeks. If you use a second screen or monitor when you're in the office, you might arrange to bring that home too, or maybe purchase one if that's the easiest thing to do. A USB dock might be useful. You may need a webcam if you're going to take part in meetings or calls that require a webcam. Reliable headphones are important, but this will allow you to take calls while you're working rather than holding your handset or your mobile phone and not being able to type away at the same time. It might be worth buying a set of reliable headphones if you don't have them. Larger items that you may think you don't need, but if it's something you regularly use, you may need to bring your printer or scanner with you if it's something that you use on a day-to-day basis. And just one more point on that, just to note, there are delays with supply chains at the moment. So if you do need to buy any kit like headphones, etc., it's probably best to order that sooner rather than later. So on to the next part then, technology for remote workers. A couple of things in here that I'm going to mention before I pass you over to Michael. So firstly, a good internet connection is essential. At the moment, we're in different times when people are working from home. It's not just themselves. So if you do have kids at home, it may be worth investing in a dongle if they're going to be hogging the internet using the likes of Netflix and Now TV and Xbox, etc., while you're trying to work. But if that's not possible and you're all using the same internet connection, what I find, for instance, I know in my house at the moment, I have 3 kids and they've all been sent home, and one's primary, one's secondary, and one's from 3rd level. And they all have work to do and it's all online. So all 3 of them are using the internet. So when I'm planning meetings, I'll be scheduling my conference calls for first thing in the morning, because I know I can get to the internet basically before they can, and I can get some work done while everybody's not pulling on the internet. But just, I suppose, to keep in mind that if your kids or the people that are at home are using the internet, it's fine for their schoolwork or college work, but I would just watch out for the Netflix and the Xbox, etc., because that's going to use all your bandwidth. Secondly, just depending on your own security setup and your company setup, you might need to have a VPN configured in advance of working from home. And Mark's going to go into a bit more on security later, so he'll probably bring that up. And the last point I just want to make, teleconferencing software is essential for those of us who have multiple meetings a day with many participants in them. So we use Microsoft Teams at IT Force and we find that invaluable. Michael's actually going to go into that a bit more. So now is probably a good time to pass over to Michael so he can go through communications in more depth. You all set, Michael? Michael?
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, thanks for the introduction, Roshan. So we're going to go through Microsoft Teams here. So Microsoft Teams, some people on the call might be already using it. Some people might have used Skype for Business. So Microsoft Teams is a continuation from Microsoft from Link Skype for Business, which is going to be retired soon. So in its most basic level, Teams is a messaging tool that enables text communication between users, whether you're in the same office and especially now when you're working remotely. So instead of sending an email, you can see somebody is online and you can send them a quick message just to get a quick reply. However, Teams is a lot more than just instant messaging. It can integrate with Outlook to set up meetings internally and externally. And that's an important part because it allows people to join meetings from outside your organization as well. You can also then collaborate on a project, create a team for that as well, and put all the information into there as well. And then it can act as your phone and that as well. So that's Microsoft Teams. Now I'm going to go just into a demo environment in here, so hopefully everybody can see my screen here. So Teams automatically opens up when you open up your computer and that, okay? Where you generally start here is in the left hand side, activity and chat, okay? So activity is generally mentions when you've been mentioned in a team or somebody is asking for information. But look at over here on the left hand side, the chat side of it, okay? So this is the window. I can see here that I have a few people that have corresponded to me. So I can see here Ted Hastings. Ted, hi Steve, have you updated? So I'm under Steve Arnott on here. So I can just go back to Ted and kind of go, thanks Ted. Pretty straightforward. So that's just simple responding back to an existing message. But what happens if I want to create an instant message to somebody? There's several ways to do this here. And again, you've got your contacts up here that it look at. You look at here on the left hand side, you're pinned. So people you might communicate with a lot more. But I am just going to start a new conversation here. So I am going to look for, say, Roz here. So Roz is in my diary and that are in my contacts, and then I can just go, hi Roz. Straightforward, Roz gets that message and that. The other thing to note on here as well is my presence up here in the top right hand corner or down at the bottom here as well, but you'll see my presence showing here as in green. So that shows that I'm available, okay? Now I can change my presence at any time in that as well, but that just means if I am looking for, like say Ted here, I can see Ted is logged in, he's showing as in green. I can see other people say are away, Kate is away in that. If I put myself on do not disturb, that means nobody will get a communication from me in that as well. So that's your presence, but it looks at your actual calendar and sees if you have a meeting. If you're in a meeting, it'll show in red. I can also say, for example, here I am talking one-to-one with Roz and that there. If I want to add a file, I can go here, click on the attach and look on my desktop, and I have a project document. So I can upload that document so to share it. If I want to call, I have an option up here at the top. I have a video call and I have just an audio call in that as well. So as you can see, there's a lot of options, and this is what a lot of people will do. I know I've been doing this quite a bit with people within inside my organization. If I want to invite a third person into the conversation, say for example, I want to invite say Kate. I'll type in Kate and then add Kate into the conversation. So that'll start a brand new conversation there as well with the three of us. And I can just type in my message. So that's instant message. Now let's go to the calendar side here. So this is my calendar here. It's a snapshot, same as in Outlook, okay? So I can look at what meetings I have here. I've already got a meeting here at 2 o'clock and that. So I've got a sales meeting that has already been set up. So if I click on that, it'll give me the information here. So I've got Ted Hastings, I've got Dot Cotton here as well. I can also see at the bottom here, join the Microsoft Teams meeting. So this is what people will see when they go to join the actual meeting and that as well. So they've got an option if they're maybe say, for example, they're external, they need to ring a number. This is audio conferencing this number. So some people might have this here, some people mightn't, and it's just an extra license called audio conference. So let's say this has all been set up. I've got meeting notes here, I've got whiteboard. So let's join in to the actual meeting that there. So before you go to actually join the actual meeting and that, okay, one important part is it gives you some options at the very start, okay? So what will happen here is can you put on your video? Do you want to keep your microphone on mute in that as well? Okay, so if I click on join now, it'll bring me into the actual meeting. So I can actually see that Ted Hastings is actually in the actual call and that, okay? So Ted doesn't have his video on. We're not just going to show video, but again, down here, just turn on the video and that as well. And some etiquette on meetings really is if somebody turns on their video, you know, it's expected that other people do that as well. In the current climate, you know, maybe you know, you want to look after bandwidth and that as well. So 3 little dots down here, I can actually record the meeting. I can actually turn on captions so it transcribes the person who is talking in that as well. Also as well, if I want to share, I can share out my screen, my window, my desktop. I can do different parts on that as well. So it is pretty straightforward in that as well. If I want to add in other participants, so say for example, Dot was also invited here but didn't join, I could ring them in as well, like, you know. So that is actually setting up a Teams meeting in that as well, okay? There is a lot more on this here as well, you know, just I didn't show, you know, how easy it is. Say for example, if I wanted to set up a meeting, I would just select a time and fill in the details, you know, who it is in that as well, and then send it out. And you can invite people externally as well. Okay, I think I've gone over my allocated time. I am going to pass now on to Mark Skelton, who is going to go through the next part here. Okay, Mark.
Hi, thanks for that, Michael. Can you hear me okay there?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Excellent, thanks for that. That was very good. Okay, we're just going to have a couple of seconds just to change over to the slides. Kieran, you might just take over the slides there. Thank you. Okay, sorry, we're just waiting for the slides to pop up. It's just going to take here we go. Thanks, Kieran. Okay, we'll move on to my slides. So anyways, my name is Mark Skelton. I'm the Chief Technology Officer, the head techie, basically, for IT Force. I'm going to talk primarily about 2 things. I'm going to be fairly quick because I realize your time is precious. The first thing I'm going to talk about is a little bit about troubleshooting, you know, very, very basic stuff, but obviously we're all sort of, you know, working from home or in a different environment. We're going to be facing different challenges that we don't normally face. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm also going to then get, again, fairly briefly into security. Information security, IT security considerations. So I'll start with troubleshooting. So obviously we're all in a slightly different environment. I mean, many of us possibly have worked from home before and we're relatively familiar with this. Some of you will be probably quite new to it, and it does throw up some additional challenges that you don't have. You know, if you're in your normal office, you probably have super duper broadband, you've got lovely networking, you've got firewalls, you've got a, you know, hopefully a proper company machine, everything works, you've got easy access to all of your systems. But obviously once you go home, that can change. For the most part, when we see issues at home, it's usually about connectivity. It's usually about issues around, you know, broadband speeds, etc., that are the most common. And sometimes people will ring us and say, you know, I'm having a problem accessing, you know, my email, or there's something wrong with our file server, where in fact the root of the problem is actually the local broadband. So a couple of quick troubleshooting. So first of all, I think Roshan alluded to it earlier, protect your broadband, protect your bandwidth. So particularly during office hours, you know, if you notice things are going slow, well, just check. I know I have kids working at home, they're under pain of death not to use Netflix, you know, what's it called, Now TV, etc. during normal business hours. They're free to use it outside of that. So just double check on that. Also, Michael mentioned, you know, if you are using, you know, the likes of video conferencing, think, do you actually need the video? Now, if you need it, turn it on. But, you know, if you don't need it, it's generally more efficient just to use audio. The next thing I would say, is let's assume you're having some problems. You're not quite sure what's going on. Everything has gone slow. Everything is not working. First thing I would say is the most likely cause here is a problem with your broadband connection. I would say if you have a VPN connection up, and a lot of you will have to get into the office, disconnect that first of all, because that's complicating issues. If you have an issue, you don't know, is it the VPN, is it something in the office, is it your just local broadband? So disconnect the VPN. Now just open up your normal internet browser. Can I browse the internet? Just go to a RTE.ie website or something like that you'll be familiar with, and just click around and see how it looks. There are speed test websites. I mentioned one there. If you just Google, speedtest.net, you'll come across them. Ookla is probably the one people are familiar with, speedtest.net. That will give you a feel for it. So if you're on supposing you're on a home 50 meg broadband package, you'll expect to see something like, somewhere between 20-30 megabytes. It'll vary from user to user, but you'll quickly become familiar with that. And, if you normally get 50 and all of a sudden you're only getting 2, then you probably know there's something wrong. If there is a problem with your broadband, it's likely to be one of two things. The most likely one is it's just a problem with the router. Maybe sometimes the line needs to be reset. The simplest thing to do there is to turn off the router. This is the the Aircom or Virgin Media, whatever supplied router that comes with your package. So usually there's a power switch. If not, just carefully pull the power cable, leave it off for about 30 seconds just to make sure it's properly powered down. Power it back on again. Now give it a couple of minutes. It takes a minute or two for them just to boot up. Then sometimes it takes another minute or two for the line to actually re-establish. The other element that can go wrong there is the Wi-Fi. So I'm talking to you now via Wi-Fi. I'm about 3 foot away from the Wi-Fi, the broadband router. Depending on where you are in the house, that might be a consideration. I know we do try to optimize the way we work, as we have 4 of us either studying or working from home. So people are trying to sit in an advantageous location. If possible, try using a cable, an Ethernet cable. I know that's not always practical, but if you're close enough to the broadband router, or you have a nice long Ethernet cable and you're in a position, that's one trick. Generally an Ethernet cable will be a lot more reliable than the Wi-Fi. It's one less thing to go wrong. Okay, so we'll assume you've gone through all of this now, and you rebooted your router, and your let's say that the internet, it seems to be working reasonably well again. Now, if you have a VPN, bring it back up again. Now, at this stage, if something goes wrong, we're fairly sure that the problem lies with your VPN. And at that stage, you probably will need to contact us to have a look at that. The other one I would say, and it does sound like a cliche, but it really does work, is to try rebooting your computer. I'd say something like 30 to 40% of issues are sorted by simply rebooting your computer. Give it a couple of minutes. On that note, it's important to reboot your computer regularly. If you're, perhaps we're all working from home, tendency might be to just walk away from the computer in the evening, lock it, and then come back again in the morning, which is fine. But if you keep doing that day in, day out, eventually you're going to. So I would certainly recommend rebooting the computer, probably on a daily basis, just to keep things fresh. Obviously, at this stage, if things aren't working for you, to contact IT Force for support. We are absolutely here. We're here to support you, during the normal office hours, as it were. If you can log stuff via the web or via email, great. But clearly, if you may not be in a position to do that, so obviously you can call us. You should know the numbers. We'll just nip on to the next slide then, and I'm going to talk a little bit about information security. Thanks, Kieran. So I'm not going to go into huge detail now. I can do a 2-hour talk, and some of you probably familiar with me coming around to customer sites doing these talks. I'm not going to get into that now because we don't have the time, but I just want to really just highlight the issue of cybersecurity, cyber hygiene, they use it, which is probably an appropriate term. So it's not just about washing your hands and all that, which is obviously critically important, but also just keeping everything as clean and as tight and as secure as you can. Cyber criminals are opportunistic, and they will absolutely use this event to attack us, and to attack us all. We're all a little bit on the back foot here. We're all working in a slightly unusual mode. Things are different. We're just that little bit more vulnerable, maybe to, an unusual request comes to, if you had been sitting in the office, maybe it's a request for a payment. You could maybe just turn to one of your colleagues and say, well, why is this person asking for this payment? Whereas now we're a little bit more isolated. We're not quite as just that little bit more vulnerable. So I would say just to be extra careful with emails, good old phishing and various other types of attacks very often come in via emails. Be super careful with links and attachments, bearing in mind that you may not be, depending on your circumstances, you may not be as well protected as you normally are. So if you're not in the office and you don't have, your a VPN solution up, you may not have the the protections that are given to you by your corporate firewall, web filtering, etc. If you're using a home device, that could be a lot less secure than your normal device. It may not be quite as up to date. It mightn't have the same antivirus. So be just particularly careful with emails, particularly careful any link. If you're even the vaguest, you're not sure, just don't click on it. Maybe reach out to the person separately and ask them about it. And again, particularly careful with attachments or even just instructions or words in emails. People looking for payments, people looking for, and it says we are all a little bit on the back foot here. It's easy to get caught out, so just to exercise extreme caution. The other issue I'll touch on here is about what devices you're using. I mean, hopefully a lot of us have company laptops. We've brought them home, which is good because they'll have by and large the same level of security and protection. But we know from talking to our customers that lots of people are using home devices of all manner, shape and size. I've seen people using Chromebooks, using iPads, using very elderly Windows 7 machines. Now, in a normal circumstances, I would just say cease, desist, don't for goodness sake do this. But I realize we are where we are, and some people just have no other option. But that's why I would certainly in the short term exercise extreme caution and try to figure out what you can do about this. We're likely to be in this position for who knows, weeks, months, I don't know. So if you have a really old device that even if it's working, you have to think about, is it secure, and maybe if possible to get it replaced. Now, I know there may be logistical issues about doing that, but at least it's not something you should be thinking about. In terms of a device, there's kind of 3 or 4 key issues I look. If somebody's using a device, I would say, well, first of all, keep your Windows updates up to date. Hopefully it's running Windows 10 if it's or at least Windows 8 or higher. If it's Windows 7, you're not going to get updates, and that is a potential security issue. Have an antivirus on it, a proper one, not a freebie. Make sure that that's active and up to date. Again, IT Force can assist you with that. Again, where practical, if somebody comes to me with an 11-year-old machine running Windows XP, there's probably very little I can do for them. Disk encryption is another important consideration. If the disk can be encrypted, now we're likely to be less mobile, I suppose, realistically over the coming weeks, but it still is, if you're putting company data on your device, and again, normally I'd say cease and desist, do not do that, but there just may be, and if you can avoid that, please do so at all costs. But if there's no other way but to work, by copying data down locally and working off it, you just need to be extra careful about that data. If it's on a non-company device, maybe not encrypted, maybe vulnerable to, virus attacks, etc. Also, a screen lock and a password are important. There's little point in encrypting a disk if somebody can just, pick up the machine and turn it on and there's no password. I'm going to finish up at this stage with just you can see the kind of bullet point is really that security matters. This stuff is important. It hasn't stopped being important. I know, we all have, maybe bigger things to be thinking about, worrying about, but the cybersecurity is still as important as it always was. And as these people are going to be coming after us all. We're already seeing, increased activity in terms of phishing stuff, often related to, fake emails relating to COVID-19, trying to get you to click on things and do stuff. So security absolutely matters. I'm going to hand back over to Roisin now, if that's okay. Roisin, are you with us?
I am, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So we have a good few questions that have come in. Thank you very much to everybody who's posed some questions. So there's going to be a number of people that can answer them. So I might just take them one by one and direct them to who I think might best be able to answer them. So the first one that has come in here that I'm going to address, I will be working from home from next week and I do not have any space but the kitchen. So we'll never be able to get away from the office it's a small organization that I work for. I have a secondary school and college student at home, and have you any further tips for this? So I suppose this is like my own scenario with my 3 at home. My own advice to you, and I might then pass over to Mark, I would say firstly check your bandwidth and see what have you got and can you get more of it? Can you upgrade from your provider, whether it's Virgin or UPC or whoever it is, if you need to do that. And if you're not sure based on when you check your bandwidth what you've got, you can come back to us and tell us what you have. We can tell you what the best thing there is. You could also consider getting a dongle. So this is, I have one of these at home that I don't allow anybody else to connect to. So it's just for these kind of scenarios where, there's even of an evening time, there's people watching the TV and there's people doing different things. So I have a Vodafone dongle that I just use for my own bandwidth for if I'm working from home. Other than that, I suppose organization, so getting timescales together, like if they're college students that you have, they may not be getting out of the bed first thing in the morning. So I would do, what I do myself is I arrange to have conference calls first thing because I know the kids aren't going to be up using the bandwidth. And then thereafter, it's more practically working it out, not allowing the Netflix and the Now TV and the Xbox during the day when, to be fair to everybody that's there. Because I suppose we could end up in a scenario here where you've got 4 or 5 people that are at home. If it's a case where we're directed to not be in the office, you could end up with both partners at home working from home and all the kids there. So that's my own advice. But Mark, have you anything that you could add to that?
Probably, I mean, you've covered it off fairly well. As I know, I mentioned about the 3G dongle. I do have one of those, actually, SIM in my tablet. It may not be, practical for everybody. They're relatively cheap, for relatively small. It gives that independence. It's probably something we didn't touch on. Is I mentioned earlier about the Netflix and the other, but really just to have contingencies or planning. What happens when your broadband goes down, and broadband networks are going to be under severe strain and stress over the coming days, and obviously if your Aircom, Virgin Media, whatever Host Ireland line goes down, there's very little you can do other than to try and call them and to get it sorted. So having a secondary connection like that, you can get a dongle that goes into your machine. You can even get little Wi-Fi ones. Probably won't give you the same quality of network, but it'll be a whole bunch better than nothing, and you could be able to do email, etc. The other thing is probably the most vulnerable thing. Generally, even with quite bad broadband, you can collect email, you can do general web browsing, you can probably work on document shares. Voice communications, such as we're doing now, may be more challenging. Possibly some people even listening might be getting a bit of chop every now and again, even though the broadband seems to be behaving. So maybe using landlines for voice communications. I know that can perhaps issues and who's going to pay the bill, etc. But to try and sort them out, I suspect your employer won't thank you if you say, well, I couldn't close that deal because I wasn't able to make a Skype call to the guy. They'll say, well, why didn't you just ring on the landline and we'll reimburse you. So just to be having conversations around like that. Other than that, I can't think of a whole lot.
Okay, so the only one other small thing that might help there is, depending on your mobile provider, I know sometimes some of them, they allow you to tether from your phone. So you're basically using your phone connection, and you may have an unlimited phone connection that you might be able to push out.
That's a very good idea, actually. I should have thought of that. Most people do have the ability to tether. Check with your provider. Some of them have kind of punitive charges for doing so. So just double check that you don't get hit with a a 500 quid bill at the end of the month for so doing.
Yeah, it's good to look into that though.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a very good idea. And again, kids, everybody probably has a mobile phone with a good chunk of mobile data. If not unlimited nowadays. So yeah, that's a very good idea.
Okay, while I have you there, Mark, the next question: would it help to put a LAN cable into your laptop?
Yes, I mentioned that earlier. It may not suit everybody. Obviously, if your broadband router is the far end of the house or whatever, you may want to consider keeping the router as close to you as is feasible. And that may simply, I know in my case, I'm literally 3 foot away from it. My wife has moved her desk, within another room just to be that bit closer, and move around a little bit. You'd be amazed sometimes even within a room. You moving 3 or 4 foot can have an impact on the speed of the Wi-Fi. But if you are in a position to use an Ethernet cable, so this will be a cable that plugs into the back of your broadband router and then into your laptop or your docking station, whatever you have. it's going to be a lot more reliable. It's going to give you, far better speeds, and it'll be one less thing to go wrong. I realise it's not, not everybody. If you're 30 feet away, you probably won't have a 30-foot cable. You may not even have an Ethernet cable. Again, they're relatively easy to buy. Just make sure if in doubt, you can contact us. And we can organise them. But you can typically buy these things quite easily in the likes of assuming they're still open, the likes of Dixon's and places like that will do them, or PC World, whatever they're called.
Okay, thank you, Mark. We've got some more questions, and we've got some also that I'm going to be asking Michael to answer. So the next one I have here, I can probably give a stab at answering this myself. Is it possible to get a laptop set up for a user remotely? It is, to a degree. Now, obviously, if it's going to somebody's home, they would need to plug it in, etc. But we can also help them via a Teams call or a video call if we need to do that to make sure they're plugging everything in correctly. Best person to talk to about that is your VCIO. So if you want to contact your VCIO, if you need to either purchase a laptop or to set it up remotely. Next question, Mark, is for yourself. As we don't have VPN set up, IT Force has helped me set up Microsoft OneDrive on the laptop that I'll be using. How is using this in relation to security?
It's a good question. I mean, it's not ideal if it's a personal laptop or a non-company. It's not. I mean, if we were having this conversation 3 weeks ago, I would say don't be doing that now. But I realise we are where we are. OneDrive is an excellent technology. It allows you to very easily, access, share, collaborate with data. But it does throw up some potential issues, particularly as you start copying and synchronizing data down locally on the device. So if this is a non-company device, does anybody else have access to it? I mean, how likely are you to, heaven forbid, the idea of leaving it on a bus seems, it's unlikely at the moment that people would be bringing it anywhere. But it's just, from an information security point of view, it's not ideal. It is possible to use OneDrive purely as a web page, but a lot of people would probably find that difficult. But it might be something that you could consider. So in that case, you're not actually bringing the data down. You're just working on it within the browser, and it's staying in the Microsoft cloud. Over time, there are absolutely technologies that we can provide to secure them. There's a technology we use called Intune, which allows you to facilitate the use of BOID devices. So it allows you to secure them without, it doesn't make them a corporate device per se, but allows you to apply certain security standards, allows you to segregate data. It's non-trivial. It's not something we can just click a mouse and say, yeah, off you go. But as time goes on, that's something that you should be maybe talking to your VCIO if you have a large cohort of home devices. It might be definitely something worth considering.
I think that might be a company laptop, Mark. We've got another little message coming in there.
I think if it's a company laptop, you should be okay. I mean, we would hope that there's a proper policy on that. I would say, as I mentioned earlier, with any endpoint device, any type of laptop, one of the things I would always insist on is that it should have full disk encryption enabled if possible, and that just means that if it did get lost or stolen, that effectively the company data would be secure, and all the rest of the stuff that you would expect from a company laptop, like an antivirus, it should be patched up to date. If it's your normal company laptop that you normally use in the office, we'll have our monitoring agents on that. We'll be patching it. That's probably worth mentioning, that just because you're not in the office, if you've got a computer, once it's connected to the internet, all of our monitoring, all of our other stuff, our security systems will work and go with that laptop. So I don't know if there's anything else.
No, that's great, Mark. I think what we'd like to do now is just, there's some questions that Michael might answer by way of demo, if that's okay, Michael?
Yeah, that's fine. So
I'll call them out to you, and you might just show us. So a couple of people have asked, how do you add a new contact?
Okay, can you see my screen?
No.
Okay, just 1 second here. Share. Okay.
I can now, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So a couple of things here, just had a look at some of the questions. So a lot of people will spend a lot of their time in Outlook, okay? So you might want to set up a meeting. So generally with meetings, you can invite 250 people onto it, okay? So this is my Outlook calendar. I can do this through Teams, but I can also do it through Outlook. So say, for example, I've got 1 o'clock. I'm going to set up a new meeting. I click on meeting, and I'm going to call this meeting just say company review, And then all I do is type in the people. So for example, this will show me people within inside my organization and that, okay? But say, for example, I wanted to invite somebody externally. So for example, I go Kieran.Fallon at itforce.ie. Sorry, I didn't change my keyboard at itforce.ie, and then I can invite other people into it as well. So I can invite 250 people onto this here as well, okay? And another thing to remember as well is then all I do is click send, okay? If you don't see that join Teams meeting and you've got Teams installed in that there, close out of Teams, close out of Outlook, open up Teams, open up Outlook, and it will appear in that, okay? And then all I do is just click send, and that's it. Now, somebody might not have Teams, so when they get the invite, they can click on that link to join it, or they can dial in the number on that. But again, it's 250 people on that. Another question came in here regarding I'm in Teams and I want to send a message to somebody in that, okay? So if I click up on here and say, for example, somebody is within the organization, I just type in their name. So for example, Kate, that person is in. But say, for example, it's somebody outside the organization. So for example, if I go Kieran.Fallon at itforce.ie. Okay, so it knows that person's not inside the organization. So then I can send a message to Kieran. Sorry, I should spell that correctly. But there's a couple of things to note on that is, and this is where IT Force will come in that as well, is this is known as a federation, okay? This is where your company is allowed to send instant messages with companies externally in that. Sometimes this will be turned on because it's best practice not to turn this on. If it's required, then they federate with that company, and then that company federates with you. So it's, again, just straightforward as that. Any other questions, Roshan?
Yes, there are.
Okay. Just 1 second here. Okay.
Michael, there's one here. Can you host an online event where you can see and hear a speaker and a moderator where they both may be working remotely from different locations? Can you do that in Microsoft Teams? And if so, what is the audience capacity of who you can invite?
Yeah, so a couple of things to note on here, and it's interesting because we're actually using a piece of technology called live events in that, okay? So standard meetings, you can invite 250. So that's just a standard meeting the way I set it up there. But if you want to set up a live event, there's a few things you need to have. You need to have an enterprise plan, but then you can invite, say, 10,000 people onto it. So in the like enterprise customers, they'll be known as town hall events. So you can invite 10,000 people. You send out, like just what Kieran did for this here meeting and that as well. So again, you have two options. You know, one option is, you know, under 250 users. The second option is live events, but it needs to be an enterprise plan, and the end user needs to have that security feature in that as well. So because a standard user will not be able to set up live events, they will need to have advanced permissions in that as well. Like, you know, so, and when they're setting up the actual meeting, when you go into calendar and you go new meeting, you would see this here called live event, and that's the one that allows 10,000 people on it. The standard one, schedule meeting, allows 250 people.
Okay, so just two quick ones more. How do you add a new contact?
Contact, pretty straightforward here. So go into chats, go into contacts. So I'll have a list, create a new contact here, just down at the bottom here in that. So you can create your own contact. What that should do here is, and we did see, you know, what it should do is pick up your contacts in Outlook and bring them across and that. You can also then have favorites, pin groups and that as well, but you can create your own contacts in there as well. And again, just very important to understand as well, it does depend. Does your organization allow you to IM people externally? It's a feature called federation.
Okay, and the final question then before we wrap up. If you're asking external people to join, what do they need, and do they need to have Microsoft Teams?
No, they don't. So on the actual invite, so if I go back into Outlook and look at the actual invite here. So let's look at this one here. So the user will get an email like this here. So they've got an option. They don't have Teams. When they click on that, they'll use a web version of Teams. Okay, so it'll download that, or you'll join through a web version. If they say, for example, are not at a computer and they're on their phone and that, they can just dial in this here number and the conference ID, and that will join in as well. But say, for example, they get this invite and it shows Dublin. Okay, they can click on local number. Say, for example, that person's in the States or in abroad, and pick a local number and then join in through the conference ID. But nobody needs to have Teams. The person who originates the actual meeting to provide this number audio conferencing, they need to have this here as an add-on, and it's just straightforward a license. Not everybody in the organization will be creating Teams, and that so not everybody will need maybe audio conferencing, but again, it's just that ability to provide a number. But again, the other side do not need to have Teams.
That's perfect. So I'm conscious of time, so I've got one very last quick question for Mark before I do the wrap up. So Mark, if you could answer, please, what antivirus software would you recommend for a home laptop?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I'm going to say a good one. Get a good one. No, listen, there's lots of good antivirus products. Obviously, I would recommend getting a commercial product that you're going to pay money for. There are freebies out there, and some of them are, decent. But I don't want to put a sales hat on. We focus on a product called WebRoot, so a lot of you may be familiar with it, and we'd probably recommend looking at that. And that's absolutely something we can help you with. If you've heard of the name, the Semantics, the McAfee's, Trends, they're all good products. But I would shy away from the freebies. Not that some of them are good, but you're not just going to get the same level of protection from them. So it might be one to run by your VCIO. I know some companies have come to us and we've been able to just extend their existing, it's not massively expensive software, and you can buy it monthly. So, so a company that might have had 50 machines and now they've asked for 10 more licenses to cover the home users, and we can absolutely, get it installed remotely and get it working for people remotely.
That's great. Thanks very much, Mark. So just to wrap up, I'd like to say a few thank yous to Kieran, our marketeer, who set everything up for us in the background. Thanks to Michael and to Mark and to everybody for attending. So I hope you found that useful and informative, and I hope it's given you a few pointers and things to consider. So one final piece of advice, I think it's probably worth having a trial run at home to make sure everything connects for you and that everything looks the way you expect it to when you're going to be working from home, assuming you are going to be working from home, and just to make sure that you can access everything you need, just in case you arrive home the day that you're not allowed to come back out to go to the office and nothing works. So in conclusion, you'll receive an email with a copy of the webinar, and feel free to share this with your colleagues. If you think of further questions beyond the end of the webinar, it's no problem at all. You can just reply to the mail when Kieran sends out the webinar and just send more questions in and we'll reply to you directly. We will, of course, send out communications regarding next webinars, and if you have any requests as to areas you'd like further information on by way of webinar, please feel free to send those in to us as well. But for today, thanks again and enjoy the rest of your day.